G'day, welcome back to Following the Chosen as we follow the Promised Land. I'm Ben McKecken from Hope Mornings, Laura Bennett from
Hello.
Hope Afternoons. We are up to episode 4. What did you think?
Yes, I really enjoyed this episode. It
Yeah.
had a lot of heart in it when you see the interactions between Moses and Bezalel, which we'll get into a little bit.
It's not about being worthy. It's about being faithful to him.
Also loved Caleb and Joshua in this episode.
I like their little partnership that's going on.
Yeah, there's a bit of humor, a bit of, fun kind of characterization alongside everything else.
It's really good
that's
sitcom
happening.
stuff. There's a few pairings in the show, and Miriam and Zipporah, I think, are another one where it's so obvious it hurts, but they're really enjoyable to watch.
Yes, and we know that Chisisi has been one of our favorites so far through the series.
Yes.
The little Egyptian that snuck in.
Well, can I list you as a volunteer?
It would be an honor to build a tabernacle for our people.
I really liked elements of what he kind of brought to this episode as well.
Cora doesn't show up as much in these episodes as some of the early ones. But in the last episode, we're also talking about this, how the Promised Land, I think, is doing a really good job of depicting when Moses is delivering the law. And it says this throughout the pages of the Bible, that Moses did this with the people and the people listened. But you can imagine that some people might have been nodding off in the crowd, or at least like really trying to stick with it, but just like, whew. But at least in Cora's defense, blaming more Moses' delivery than the actual law itself, which is good.
Look, I know it's all important, but my goodness.
And before we get into the episode, we're up to the 4th episode. I
Yeah.
can't believe we haven't yet mentioned the opening titles. I love the opening titles. They've got this Pulp Fiction feel about them, like the surf guitar theme going on through it, mixed with the plagues of Egypt and escaping Egypt and through the Red
animation.
Sea animation. What now?
I know, it's something I haven't actually pondered really.
Really?
Like you've said, the fact you bring it up, I go, oh my gosh, yes,
It's
is
very
an element of the show.
That's the worst Pulp Fiction. What's that
beautiful.
surf song? Move on from that, please.
It
Laura.
was very beautiful. The opening credits, though, do deserve acknowledgement. We should have acknowledged them sooner. So well done to whoever put those together. Because they are a bit of fun and they do set the tone for this show, which
Yes.
I think is probably important.
Yeah, and I think the rest of the music, which is loosely based off that theme-ish, similar to The Chosen, does a really good job of coming through as a refrain. So I'm sorry, we should have acknowledged it earlier on.
Soundtrack, important to mention.
This episode, important to mention, it's all about the tabernacle, the creation of the tabernacle. Anybody, I think even loosely familiar with the first few books of the Bible would know about the tabernacle. But in a 30-minute episode, Laura did a pretty good job of a part of God's word that I think, if you admit it, people tend to skim read or like grit their teeth and like, I've got to read all the detail of everything that went into the tabernacle and all the people involved and all the things and all that. And the Promised Land's able to fit it in about 30 minutes or so. There's still more to come in the next couple of episodes, but they've done a pretty good job of making it accessible and kind of fun.
Well, and you pull out what is notable, I suppose, in that, because it's very easy when you're reading scripture, especially Old Testament stuff, to just see it as big chapters of information and just this kind of detail. But a show like The Promised Land gives you context for it and helps you understand why some of that detail would matter. And the humans obviously involved within the situation, not so much just the framework, which is something I wanted to mention actually about this show in general that we haven't really touched on, is the way that it does bring the Old Testament to life. Because very much so, I think in modern Christianity a bit, we can so much more easily focus on New Testament stuff, of course the Gospels, of course, looking at Jesus' life and everything that teaches us and shows us for how to live in our everyday kind of situation. The Old Testament is looked at more in this like reflective way, or this kind of old framework of things that is passed because of the New Testament, the new framework. The Old Testament can kind of be like left over there and not necessarily as embraced as New Testament sorts of things, partly because we probably just don't understand it if we haven't really done a lot of study into it. And that's what I like about the Promised Land in part, is that it is bringing the Old Testament to life and making it more relatable in a way that perhaps we don't necessarily generally give it credit for, having that ability to be more relatable.
Now, we do need to get to Moses and Bezalel. Before we do, though, I need to remind you, in case you didn't know, that we are doing a special breakout series on the Promised Land here on Following the Chosen. But as the name suggests, we follow the Chosen TV series. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and head to YouTube, all that kind of thing, to go back into the previous seasons of the Chosen, where Laura and I do our thing, having deep conversations and fun and accessible ones about The Chosen each episode. Go back and check it out. You will totally thank us later on. So we're in The Promised Land, season 4, and you mentioned Bezalel. Who is who?
Well, Bezalel is the guy that was involved in setting up the tabernacle, helping with the construction of that, but he is also one of the guys who was involved in creating the golden calf.
The idol. I built it with Aaron. He cut it, but I helped him put it together.
Dun, dun, dun.
Bum, bum, ba, which happened in episode 3, which go back and listen to our conversation on that if you haven't yet. This, for me, was one of the more significant elements of episode 4 because you have Bezalel freaking out about the fact that he is involved in building the tabernacle.
Not just involved, handpicked by God. Thank you very much.
So very, very, there's a high level of responsibility on him. This is no joke. This is a really significant, important thing for him to be doing. And he's kind of having this oh crap moment where he is realizing, like, how can I, as somebody who is involved in building the golden calf, this thing that is so against, adoration of God, worship of God and everything like that, to then be charged with doing something as significant as the tabernacle. And that gives us this wonderful conversation that happens between him and Moses about how we address challenges in our past, failings that we feel we may have, shame and all of those sorts of things, and then matching them up with whatever is on our lives right now that we feel we need to do, those sorts of things where God maybe you feel like God's wanting you to do a particular thing, but are you qualified? Are you kind of quote unquote clean enough to do something so holy or so important? That to me was a really significant conversation that they gave attention to in this episode.
I have broken God's law. But God chose me anyway.
And on the one hand, Moses, in a series where we've often talked about the leadership aspect, on the one hand, I thought he did a great job as a leader, going to somebody saying, you are wanted for this task, God picked you. You've been rebuffing it, but I'm going to keep gently but firmly coming to you and lobbying you in lots of different directions. But not, he does start off by trying to tell him, but he takes different approaches along the way. That's on one hand. And then on the other, the conversation that they had, it's one of the best moments I found in the Promised Land of bringing to the fore our relationship with God. And Moses says stuff about, it's not about being worthy. If any of us were trying to be worthy, we aren't, and so we would never get there. But it's about being faithful, and we're faithful to God when we know that we need God and we're available to God and we're there to put his ways first. And out of all the Promised Land, I think it's the most amount that I've at least noticed where it really deeply connects with faith in God, and definitely shows you that it's not all about the rules, which I think you can get lost in it. And perhaps for anyone coming to the Promised Land that doesn't have a lot of knowledge about the Bible and does think that following God is all about following the rules, you may pick that up at different moments in the Promised Land, but not that conversation with Bezalel. Yeah. And I also like the injection of humor in that conversation with Moses confessing about murdering someone. And the lines that Bezalel has in that is fantastic.
Yeah.
Were you tried for this crime? That's not the point of the story. It seems like maybe it should be the point of the story.
Like about...
Maybe you should. Moses is basically saying he murdered somebody and didn't, wasn't charged or there was no consequence for it. Yeah.
Were there witnesses?
Probably should have been.
Oh, man. That was fantastic. Also, some other elements of humor throughout. Chisisi, there was a slightly better... Each episode seems to be having, for want of a better word, excuse me for this, for want of a better word, a women's theme storyline going through with Miriam and Zipporah. And this one, though, was basically overrun by Chisisi.
Yeah, because he kind of wanted to sneak in and see what was happening. And like the secret women's business kind of stuff ends up being something that he wants to pretend he can just look at without anyone kind of noticing. But he brings so much humor and fun to it. But what I noticed about him as well, like what struck me about him in this episode is essentially how his lie has to grow, because he keeps fabricating so many details that the lie of who he truly is starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you're looking at the Promised Land for some life lessons, here is one right here in the fun and silliness of Chisisi, that if you start with a little lie, it is going to keep growing and growing unless you actually address it. I hadn't really
thought about that, how deep in he is.
Yeah.
And he's getting to that point of like, you're starting to believe your own lies, I think.
Yes.
Or at least you're getting confused between, is that, or maybe it's not, actually, maybe that was accurate.
Yeah.
Not really sure. So that was pretty good, moments of levity throughout the episode. And then what did you make of Joshua, Caleb, and Aaron? So Aaron's like slightly in the doghouse after Golden Calf happened, and Moses is giving him sort of lesser tasks to do.
Yeah.
And in among all the collection, which we should point out in the Promised Land, does a great job of indicating that the people of God, they were asked to voluntarily contribute to the making of the tabernacle, and they did. Like they came in droves, and they gave all sorts of amazing stuff that could be used in worship and honor of God. And in amongst all that, Aaron is trying to lead the charge on the collection, and Joshua and Caleb are
just messing up sorting the piles, basically. It seems something so... I just think the humor of the Promised Land is in the detail of these big instructions, all of the list of things, and yes, bring all of your, sort of donations, etc. Have we actually thought about what that would have been like to sort, and the silliness, and how people would have interacted around the organizational side of these things? In real life, that's where a lot of the humor is, because of this kind of like the interplay between different personalities and people, and how you would do a task your way versus how you would do a task your particular way. I think that's what we see with Joshua and Caleb. I just meshed their names together. That's what they bring in this episode, just these different little approaches and how they try to cover up their mistakes. And I love it. I love the interplay between them.
Are you crazy? Silver can be... No! Caleb, do not mess around like that.
Which also is a good tick in the box for those behind the Promised Land, that as much as you can simplify the whole show to The Office meets Exodus, they've done a good job of arriving at different circumstance, different exchanges that totally map onto not just an office experience, but any kind of workplace and any sort of interaction where you've got bosses and colleagues and tasks and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
They're doing a pretty good job of developing out of scripture. Oh, and I'm with you. I had not stopped to think about like who was tallying everything up, and where even was it kept, and how was it all sorted out, and how was they in the desert building this incredible portable tent that was going to be the... this show's actually making me stop to think about what that was like.
And that's something I want to touch on, a thought you brought up earlier in terms of what this show is making us think about. Because when you consider the idea, as some people do, as you said, of following God being all about the rules and all about that sort of stuff, and you can and you can't do this, what this show has made me think about is how much more that was about the people and not actually God's intention. Because the way the people were behaving demanded such detailed, explicit structure to the rules, because it's almost like they needed it, was at least my reading of the way the Promised Land is presenting stuff. But God's intention all along was to simplify it, to bring it back. Like his goal, when you look at the 10 Commandments, that takes, hundreds and thousands of like laws down to 10. And then when Jesus arrives on the scene, it's down to 2. Love God, love people. And I kind of like that the Promised Land, intentionally or not, for me really put that thread kind of front and center of God's been trying to make it about the basics all along. Love God, love people, but the sort of nature of humanity seemed to be the thing that made it so much more complicated than all of this has ever been meant to be. The life of following God is really simple, but it's like we've overcomplicated it, seemed to be the message.
And as much as we were focusing, I think rightly, on that conversation between Bezalel and Moses towards the end of the episode, I thought Caleb hit the nail on the head in amongst the collection, and Aaron getting all stroppy and having a go at Joshua, the underling, for not doing the job right. But Caleb asks, is this for the Lord? What we're doing now, is this for the Lord? And Aaron, of course it is. And Caleb is like, but it doesn't feel like it. Like you're sucking not just the fun and the life out of it, but you're sucking the worship and the adoration and the service and the love for God out of this. It's a task, sure, but who is it for and why are we doing it? And Caleb kind of knocks that out of the park in the middle of the episode in something of almost an offhanded throwaway scene.
Is this for the Lord?
Yes, of course.
Really? Well, it doesn't feel like it.
So, Laura, that's episode 4. Only 2 more to go in this super short season of the Promised Land. And our Shupa? I'm doing your Joshua Caleb thing. Super short breakout season of following the chosen as we look at, understandably, the Promised Land. Be sure to subscribe. What is going on with me? Here's what you need to focus on: subscribing, sharing, star rate, all that kind of thing. Let everybody know about following the chosen / the Promised Land. Also, let us know how you're traveling with the Promised Land. We'd love to hear all about it at hopepodcast.com.au. On YouTube, down in the comments. It'd be great to interact with you. And we will see you next time on Follow the Chosen.